I got the license plate of the white Broncos.
Who remembers this infamous footage? On June 17, 1994, it was beamed live around the world. Former American footballer O.J. Simpson being pursued by police, rather slowly, down Interstate 405, suspected of having murdered his ex-wife Nicole and her friend Ronald Goldman. I'm Nick Schildberger, Managing Director of audio agency SoundCartel, and I'm here to talk about branded podcasts. So why the footage of O.J. Simpson? Well, it's the car he was a passenger in, the iconic white Ford Bronco, made even more recognisable by those events in June 1994. But by 1996, Ford discontinued the Bronco. Was it because of what we just saw, or were sales already tanking? Or did sales actually jump up after OJ's car chase? Well, for answers, the Ford Motor Company, in partnership with Pacific Content, produced a brilliant branded podcast, Bring Back Bronco, The Untold Story. It's an 8-part serial podcast that tracks the iconic rise, untimely fall, and unexpected rebirth of the Bronco in 2021. Now, Ford could have ignored that O.J. Simpson part of the Bronco story, but instead they leaned in, warts and all. It's decisions like this, combined with engaging storytelling, that make this such a successful podcast. Now, the term branded podcast leaves a bad taste in some podcasting circles. Large corporates destroying the fabric of indie podcast creativity. But I'm here to dispel the myth that all branded audio is evil. Engaging, original, entertaining storytelling and content marketing by brands can coexist to provide value for both the brand and the audience. But there are some rules that make the difference between success and failure. First, as a brand, it's best to not think of the term branded podcast. Pacific Content uses the term original podcasts, like Netflix produces Netflix originals and Stan originals. At SoundCartel, we encourage brands not to think about themselves first, but instead think of the audience and create something original and of real value. They can then reach an audience far beyond those that already have an affiliation with their brand. So if you do something different and unexpected, you'll stand out from the crowd. And that's how you'll grow the biggest audience. And listeners will thank you for it. If the goal of your podcast is to sell more product quickly, then stop. A radio ad disguised as a 20-minute podcast will not work. It will alienate your audience, reflect poorly on your brand, and podcasting as a medium. However, if your objective is to fill the top of your marketing funnel, you could consider placing host-read or pre-recorded ads in podcasts. It's a far better strategy. And if done properly with a healthy advertising budget, it can definitely work. At SoundCartel, I must admit, we found brands are much savvier about the benefits of podcasting than just a few years ago. So why should brands invest in creating original podcasts? Well, podcasts contribute to the brand building efforts of a business in the same way that traditional forms of marketing do, like radio, outdoor, digital ads, TV, and so on. It's unlikely to be the single source that's going to transform your business, but its true aim is to increase brand awareness, build loyalty, and trust. And it's going to reach your audience where they already are, with listenership increasing every year, whilst also reaching new audiences that might not have considered your brand before. Podcasts are an opportunity to surprise and delight listeners in a new and very intimate medium that humanises the brand and gives it a voice. And this is nothing new to us at SoundCartel. For more than 3 decades, we've been helping leading brands use audio to do all of these things, well before the word podcast even existed. Remember audio cassettes? Well, that's how back in the day we helped the likes of the big banks, Australia Post, Rio Tinto and Telstra, to name just a few, add value to their audience, some of which also required a little brand humanisation. But what we've always done is encourage brands to start with an audio strategy and be clear on where a podcast fits into their marketing strategy more broadly. I'd like to use one of our current client podcasts as a case study for what and how a podcast can make a huge impact on the business. And that podcast is In the Know, that we produce with Magellan Asset Management, a top 100 ASX listed wealth management company. Now, on the surface, a pretty dry topic, but what Magellan has done is play to their strengths as a brand. Magellan's Chief Investment Officer, Hamish Douglas, is not only a very clever man and astute investor, but he's extremely well connected internationally. So the marketing team, led by Lucy Briggs, has used these connections to pull guests with real star power, like former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morrell and Starbucks President and CEO Kevin Johnson. Add to this that Hamish Douglas conducts all the interviews in a very conversational manner. It not only makes for highly interesting conversations with these international heavy hitters, but it means the marketing team can utilise Hamish and the guests in the amplification of the podcast. And Lucy's team understands the value of high quality audio, which is why they partnered with SoundCartel to ensure the quality of Magellan as a premium brand was maintained throughout the podcast, something they admittedly couldn't do themselves over Zoom. And Magellan does not sell products or push listeners to their suite of investment funds during episodes. And the results? Well, the first 10 episodes have been downloaded 105,000 times, so averaging more than 10,000 per episode. According to hosting platform Omni Studio's benchmarking analysis of the several hundred million downloads they receive each month, it puts In the Know well into the top 5% of all podcasts in the world and closing in on the top 2%. Not bad for a little Aussie podcast only 10 episodes into its first season. So, how has Magellan grown their audience? First, they've created a home for the podcast on their website and also promoted the podcast on the homepage of their website. Critically, Magellan's marketing team has fully embraced the podcast and pulled on its internal resources to promote it to all their clients, advisors and followers via email campaigns, LinkedIn and other social media. They've also used traditional PR, and having guests like former US Governor of the Federal Reserve Kevin Warsh has resulted in articles in the Australian and Financial Review. Lucy says the podcast has been extremely well received by clients, and with engagement averaging 29 minutes, she's delighted because this sort of engagement is so much harder to achieve with video. And she's definitely happy that their 6 months of deliberation ended up in moving forward with a podcast. So before I finish, here's 5 tips on how to produce the very best branded audio. Number 1, start with the strategy. Why is your brand creating audio? Have a clear purpose and do it for the right reasons, not to get rapid sales and not because everybody else has a podcast. We use detailed strategy workshops with our clients to consider the purpose and all the critical ingredients that go into creating a successful podcast. Number 2, it must be audience focused and not brand focused. Understand who your audience is, what they'll find entertaining, and deliver that to them. Number 3, it's obvious, but create your podcast at the very highest quality possible. This is why for 3 decades we've always had an in-house studio. Clients appreciate the effort that we go to make them sound good. And it's fun. See all the smiling faces? We also spend the time required in editing, post-production, mixing and mastering to create broadcast quality audio. This quality reflects immediately on your brand. Which leads to point number 4. Don't skimp on the budget. Yes, audio can be cheaper to produce than video, but like anything, to do it properly does require an investment. If you have a fixed or small budget, consider quality over quantity and perhaps produce fewer episodes. You'll still be able to stand out from the crowd and get the best bang for your buck. And number 5, don't forget to leave a budget for marketing and amplifying your podcast. An audience will not find your podcast if you don't tell them about it. But as a brand, you already have an advantage. You have databases, email lists and followers, all potential listeners right at your fingertips. But this does require commitment and resources to manage properly. So plan for it and don't waste the investment on production by not selling it. To hear more on podcasting for brands, I co-host Podcasting Essentials with one of our esteemed SoundCartel producers, Nicole Goodman. And we talk to podcasting movers and shakers each fortnight to give brands the very latest trends and advice. So my final words to brands thinking about producing a podcast are: be bold, be brave, be creative, and fully commit. If you're going to do it properly. Do something different and make something truly memorable.